Late March, 1945. A lone American lieutenant, blindfolded, is escorted through the streets of the German city of Aschaffenburg. He is a messenger, carrying a formal ultimatum from the U.S. Third Army. The terms are simple and absolute. The garrison must surrender unconditionally. They have 3 hours to comply. If they refuse, the city faces, in the words of the message, total annihilation by artillery and air bombardment. The officer has delivered his ultimatum. Now, he waits for a reply, and with him, an entire American army across the river. The fate of a city hangs on a single word. The German commander's reply was a scornful rejection. The expected surrender instead ignited a 9-day inferno of street-to-street combat, one of the most vicious urban battles of 1945 on the Western Front. The ultimatum's failure raises a dark question from the Reich's final, desperate days. What was a more powerful motivator? Fear of the enemy's bombs, or fear of being branded a traitor by your own side? To understand this choice, we must look at the two forces set to collide: a veteran American division and a German fortress city, defended by a volatile mix of soldiers and old men. Across the Main River, the force tasked with taking Aschaffenburg was the U.S. 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds. These were not fresh troops. They were hardened veterans who had bled their way up the Italian peninsula at Anzio and Salerno and fought through the mountains of France. By the spring of 1945, their primary objective was no longer about capturing ground for glory. It was about speed. Every river crossed, every town taken, was one step closer to the end of the war and the journey home. To them, Aschaffenburg was just another obstacle on the operational map, a logistical problem to be solved with maximum efficiency and minimum American casualties. The ultimatum was simply the most efficient tool they had. But on the other side of the river, the logic of war was different. On March 21st, Hitler had personally declared Aschaffenburg a Festung, a fortress. This was not a mere military designation. It was a political death sentence. It forbade surrender and demanded the city be held to the last man. The man ordered to enforce this decree was Major Emil Lamberth. His command was a desperate collection of what was left of the German war machine. He had a few hundred depleted Wehrmacht soldiers, a school of young, zealous officer candidates prepared to die for the regime, and several battalions of the Volkssturm, the People's Storm. These were teenage boys and men in their 50s and 60s, given old rifles and a handful of anti-tank rockets, often more afraid of their own government than the approaching enemy. Herein lay the fundamental, irreconcilable conflict. The Americans saw a military problem that could be solved with a rational threat. The Germans, under the Festung order, were trapped in an ideological battle where surrender was equated with treason. Major Lamberth wasn't just weighing the odds of a hopeless fight. He was weighing an order from the Führer against the survival of his men and the city he was sworn to defend. The American ultimatum was not just a threat of firepower, it was a direct test of his loyalty, and his response would be the first and most critical shot in the battle to come. The 3 hours ticked by in tense silence. On the west bank of the Main River, the American command posts waited. Then, the silence was broken, not by a white flag, but by a radio broadcast from the city's defenders. The message was short and unambiguous. The matter is resolved. The German soldier does not surrender. That defiance was absolute. We now know from German accounts what happened inside Major Lamberth's command post. The American ultimatum was never truly debated. When one of his staff officers dared to suggest the terms should at least be discussed, Lamberth had the man arrested on the spot for defeatism. The door to negotiation had not just been closed, it had been bolted shut from within. For the 45th Division, the psychological gambit had failed. The plan for a quick, efficient capture was gone, replaced by the grim certainty of a direct assault. The threat of annihilation had been ignored. Now the Americans had to make good on their promise and pay the price in blood and steel to take a city that refused to die. The first American rifle companies began their assault across the Main River on March 25th. They expected a fight, but they also expected it to be short. Instead, they hit a wall of disciplined fire. The initial attacks were thrown back with shocking speed and heavy casualties. This was not the disorganized, crumbling defense the Americans had encountered in other towns. The fire was accurate, coordinated, and coming from expertly concealed positions. The young officer cadets, in particular, used their city's geography with lethal precision, turning familiar windows and rooftops into deadly sniper nests and machine gun emplacements. For the veterans of the 45th Division, the message was clear. Aschaffenburg was not a hollow shell. Realizing their initial miscalculation, The American command structure responded with its most powerful tool, overwhelming industrial might. General Patton's Third Army did not tolerate delays. If the city would not be taken by infantry, it would be systematically dismantled by steel. The call went out for the heavy guns. Division artillery was soon joined by corps-level assets, 155mm long tom cannons and massive 240mm howitzers, whose shells could obliterate entire buildings. For days, they engaged in a methodical, block-by-block demolition. From the sky, P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers of the 9th Air Force added to the destruction. They swooped in on relentless sorties, their rockets and 8.50 caliber machine guns strafing anything that moved in the streets below. The ultimatum's threat of total annihilation was no longer a psychological tactic. It was now a daily, operational reality. But artillery can't hold ground. After the barrages lifted, the infantry of the 45th had to go back in, advancing into the smoldering ruins they had just helped create. The battle devolved into a brutal, intimate grind. The Americans quickly learned the deadly lessons of urban combat. They developed a technique called mouse-holing, bringing M10 tank destroyers forward to fire their 3-inch cannons directly at a building's walls. The shell would blast a hole, and infantry would pour through the gap, bypassing booby-trapped doors and stairwells. The German defenders adapted as well. Using the city's ancient network of cellars and sewers, small units would emerge behind American lines, fire a volley from a captured Panzerfaust or machine gun, and then vanish back into the rubble-choked labyrinth. For the men and boys defending Aschaffenburg, the world was reduced to the scream of incoming shells and the constant concussion of explosions. From their perspective, the battle was a descent into chaos. Communications between command posts were severed by the bombardment. Ammunition for their rifles was strictly rationed. The initial defiant fervor was burning away, replaced by the grim reality of a hopeless siege. They fought with skill, turning every ruined house into a miniature fortress. But they were trapped, isolated, and dying. Their resistance fueled by a desperate, dwindling supply of courage and bullets. Day by day, street by bloody street, the American advance was relentless. Despite the heavy losses, the sheer weight of numbers and firepower was grinding the defense down. By April 2nd, the 8th day of the battle, the remaining German defenders were cornered. They had been pushed back into a small pocket in the northern part of the city. Their last stand was centered on the imposing Schloss Johannisberg, the city's 17th century castle, its red stone walls now scarred and blackened. The battle should have been over, yet from this final redoubt, the resistance was somehow even more fanatical. But as the perimeter shrank, more German soldiers began to surrender, often in small, terrified groups. And as American intelligence officers began to question them, a disturbing pattern emerged in their stories. They spoke less of loyalty to the Reich, and more of a different, more immediate fear. The reason they fought to the death, it seemed, might have nothing to do with the Americans at all. The pattern that emerged from interrogations was not one of fanatical loyalty, but of pure terror. Post-battle analysis of captured German documents would later confirm the prisoners' stories. Major Lamberth had maintained his iron grip on the city by unleashing so-called fliegende Standgerichte, flying courts-martial. These were mobile execution squads, with the authority to summarily shoot any soldier found away from his post or accused of defeatism. The defenders of Aschaffenburg were trapped. In front of them, the American 45th Division. Behind them, Major Lamberth's firing squads. They fought to the death because for many, retreat or surrender was also a death sentence. The heroic last stand was exposed as something far darker. The Americans now understood the real enemy wasn't just the German soldier in the ruins, but the commander holding a gun to his back. By April 3rd, the Americans were at the gates of the Schloss Johannisberg, Lamberth's final command post. Infantry from the 179th Regiment pushed into the castle grounds, clearing the last, desperate pockets of resistance. After 9 days of brutal fighting, they expected to find the architect of this defiance in a Wagnerian last stand, fighting to the death as his own iron code demanded. But the climax of the battle was a stunning anticlimax. Deep in the castle's cellars, amidst the dust and chaos, WWII found him. He was not leading a final charge. He was not holding a pistol. According to the official after-action reports, Major Emil Lamberth was captured while attempting to disappear, wearing a civilian overcoat pulled over his officer's uniform. The commander, who had his own men shot for cowardice, was caught committing the ultimate act of it. With his quiet surrender, the fighting sputtered to a halt. The Battle of Aschaffenburg was over. And so we return to the ultimatum and its promise of total annihilation. It was not a bluff. By the time the guns fell silent, over 80% of Aschaffenburg was rubble. The cost was paid by all: hundreds of German soldiers, hundreds of American GIs, and hundreds of civilians. Patton's psychological gambit failed, because it was a weapon of rational warfare, aimed at an opponent who would choose to save his city. But Major Lamberth was not that opponent. He was an enforcer in an ideological prison, where surrender was a greater crime than destruction. The battle for Aschaffenburg is a brutal lesson from the war's final days. The ultimatum was a threat meant to prevent the city's destruction, but in the end, to conquer Aschaffenburg, the Americans were forced to fulfill their own dark promise and systematically destroy the very place they came to take.